Great. Thanks so much for having me. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking about peer presenting at conferences. I'm going to talk about what I've learned, what I love about it, and also just share a few kind of war stories. So hopefully there's a little bit of time at the end, but this might go a little bit over. Either way, I'm pretty keen to hear your take as well, in particular, if you've seen any like really good or really bad peer presentations. I'm really into it, so tell me about it. But as a relatively new member to this group, I'm going to start by sharing a bit about myself and the kind of presentations that I like to work on. So I'm a Kiwi. I'm actually from New Zealand. Please don't mix that up. I'm not Australian. I just live here. Um, my background is in hospitality management, but my life kind of took unexpected twists and turns. And I spent some time studying landscape architecture at university before venturing into the world of business management and accounting, where I earned a triple diploma. However, my path kind of led me to running a nightclub, working from 9 p.m. till 7 a.m. for 4 long years. And during that time, I faced pretty severe substance abuse problem and just surrounded myself with the wrong crowd. So one day when I kind of hit rock bottom, I decided to turn my life around completely. I quit abusing substances. I ended my toxic relationship. I joined a kickboxing gym and I started teaching myself to code. And with that, I found incredible support from friends who helped me transform my life. Fast forward 9 years, and I'm now a tech lead at Fresho, living in Melbourne. That's right. I should have before. It's 2 a.m. So if I make a mistake, it's either because I'm tired or you're not understanding my New Zealand accent. I'm also a recent state champion kickboxer. So I do a bit of Muay Thai on the side. And now I travel the world speaking at tech conferences outside of my day job. But all that said, I firmly believe that my achievements just wouldn't have been possible without the power of collaboration and working closely with others. And when it comes to speaking at tech conferences, I have the privilege of partnering with my friend, Michael. He's a seasoned software engineer with over 20 years of experience and a father of 4. And we met while working together at Fresho and discovered we shared an interest in public speaking. It all started when I tagged along with Michael to a local Ruby meetup. And after a few visits, we both decided to give talks on the same day, which ignited a spark that would just change our journey forever. And since then, Michael and I have mostly been known for our talk, 10x Your Development with Pair Programming, which we've presented around 10 times all across the world. And it still remains in high demand. So what we do is we use real-life skits and demonstrations to engage our audience and shed light on the benefits and challenges of pair programming. And while we do tackle, a few technical aspects, we also address important topics like gender bias, which I've personally encountered many times within the software community. I'm sure some of you can relate. And while that presentation emphasizes kind of soft skills, we recently sought to demonstrate our technical expertise further, and we built a kickboxing robot for Ruby Kaigi in Japan earlier this year with a, quote, Rube Goldberg amount of hardware-based live demos. That was a great time. So why do we do talks together? I mean, loads of people, in fact, most speakers go out on their own to present. And for the most part, they do a fantastic job. So why don't I just do that too? Like, why do I need somebody else beside me? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, I'm pro pairing. So for the last 6 years, I've worked in like a 100% pair programming capacity at Fresho. And that's how Michael and I started working together as well in this 100% pair programming fashion. But pairing doesn't just apply to programming. So what is it all about? Pairing is about collaboration and based on the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In reality, neither of us have been successful at writing talks on our own, but together we seem kind of unstoppable. And I don't know about any of you, but life is just more fun with friends. But there's also another reason why I do it. So I could go around telling people that we need more diversity and complaining that my life is hard or I get an unfair deal because I didn't have strong technical women role models. But complaining about that's just not going to help anyone. So what I want to do is I want to show people what it means to be diverse, to be equitable, that it's normal to see men and women working together with equal opportunities to lead and to speak and to be on stage at big technical events. We're here, all of us, and we belong here, just like everyone else who does have a beard. And so with that snarky remark, I'll move on. I'm sure a few people are curious or thinking, it's a bit odd that I'm at a WNB meetup discussing peer presenting when, number one, my peer isn't here with me, and number two, my peer is a big loud man with a beard. So I thought it would be interesting to discuss the dynamics there and what it's like from my perspective. First, I want to talk about equality versus equity, and what does that mean? So this is a classic example some of you might be familiar with already. You can see on the left-hand side that equality is all about equal treatment, irrespective of status or identity. And with equity, on the other hand, in some circumstances, people need to be treated differently in order to provide meaningful equality of opportunity. Another example that I'm sure we can all relate to takes place in the meeting room at work. We've probably all been in that situation where we say something in a meeting only to be ignored or shut down. Meanwhile, our male colleagues share the same opinion or idea and are suddenly praised for their genius. Well, how can we achieve our fair share of equity in the meeting room? An answer to that question is through allies. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but men tend to be more receptive when hearing the voices of other men. Maybe it's something to do with, like for like. By finding true male allies, they can help to promote our value and give us a stronger voice. So how do you know if you have an ally? Well, they not only back up your ideas, they also highlight your participation in generating the idea in the first place. They help you to advertise the value that you bring because, it's not obvious enough on its own, apparently in some cases. Most of the time, our allies are still learning. So another way to identify them is that they're open and they're willing to improve the way that you're represented. So they're really receptive to feedback and to hearing your point of view and your feelings. So then what about conference examples? When it comes to peer presenting, I like to consider what I refer to as the magician's assistant. And what I mean by that is, if you imagine a magic show, there's usually a main act, and he's usually a magician. And he's usually depicted with an assistant, a sexy, dolled-up woman in a revealing outfit whose main job is to help the magician prepare for the show and join them on stage, only to bring out props and set up equipment and help with tricks and illusions. A bit of eye candy for the audience. This is absolutely what we aim to avoid at all costs when peer presenting. And Michael and I are perhaps, more sensitive to this idea than others. Because we peer present so often, we're always interested to watch the dynamics of other peer presenters and understand what they do well. In particular, we're very interested in other guy-girl combinations. There is one presentation in particular that really upsets us. It happened at a local meetup. There was a guy, he was quite well known in the local JavaScript community. He decided to do a peer presentation with his friend, a woman who was visiting from out of town. We watched them set up, and it was obvious the presentation was running off his machine because he did most of the setup, right? And she stood beside him. And then when it came to presentation time, it started off well. She spoke first, and just a few minutes in, she was kind of supposed to do a demo, but had some complications with the mappings on this guy's keyboard and didn't quite know where the code was running. So he got up and immediately took over to get it up and running before handing it back to her. Okay, little hiccup, not a big deal. So she continued, but it wasn't long before she ran into another issue, and he took over again. But this time, he did the demo himself before continuing on with his part of the talk. So she stood there awkwardly on the stage next to him for a few minutes before sitting down in the audience because, well, it was apparent that she just wouldn't be needed there. There are a number of things wrong with that picture. The talk didn't have a need for two people. It wasn't designed that way. That's your number one problem. Although it probably wasn't intentional, she was set up to fail and kind of looked like an idiot by not getting a run through of the setup and not being the one to drive the setup, particularly on someone else's machine. And the majority of the audience didn't notice anything wrong. So we talked to a few people afterwards, and they were surprised to hear our interpretation. This feeds in to people's unconscious bias about women and their coding or technical abilities. Unconscious bias. It's an interesting concept. So we all have these, and they're undoubtedly difficult to change. So even once a person becomes aware that they have them, it's still pretty hard to change it. But I believe that over time and through generations, as we continue to display enough examples, strong examples of people who contradict these biases, we can change the perception of the masses and ultimately redefine today's stereotypes. And one way for us to help with that is by peer presenting as men and women who are perceived as equals by the audience. So how do we do that? The answer is with a great deal of difficulty, a great deal of effort, and no real measure of effectiveness. So in reality, we could be going to all this effort for nothing, but I kind of hope not. Some of the things that Michael and I put a lot of thought into when we peer present include stage positioning. So I'm much smaller than Michael and quieter and shorter. So I'm always a step forward, closer to the center of the stage. And if possible, I'll stand on a small step behind the podium as well, so that we're kind of a similar height. We often do selfies with the audience afterwards. And we realized after a couple of talks that if Michael takes the picture, he takes up most of the picture. So now I take the photo and he takes a few steps back, and we kind of even up at that point. Because, you know, you can see in some of these pictures, he's a lot bigger than I am. We think about the amount of spoken lines. So we don't split the spoken lines 50-50. In fact, I speak at least 60% of the time, but even with that, it can still seem like Michael did most of the talking because he's got such a much louder, deeper voice. So we did that on purpose, because if it was a 50-50 split, it'd seem like he spoke 60 or 70% of the time to the audience. We think about who is writing the code during live demos. So I try to do more of the live demos, although it's a bit of a battle because he kind of likes to show off his skills. We think about the characters and the personas that we play during skits as well. So Michael likes to joke around, and he kind of tends to play a bit more of a funny kind of clown character. But that, you know, that also potentially makes me look like kind of a hard ass or a know-it-all, which has other negative implications for unconscious bias of women, you know, particularly as I move into leadership. So haven't thought too much about that one yet, but it is something to keep in mind. So I mentioned it can be a great deal of effort to consider all these factors when putting together a peer presentation. But let's look at some of the other disadvantages, and then we'll get into advantages. I promise there are some. So first off, the time it takes to write the talk. Anyone who's written a conference talk before will tell you it takes a long time. A lot of time, a lot of effort. You know, I've heard people suggest approximately 40 to 60 hours for a good talk. That's a lot of effort. We don't have stats, but I suspect it actually takes longer to write a talk when you're peer presenting and you're both equally contributing, because of the effort involved in collaborating with other people. And since we're both pretty passionate and we have strong opinions, we find ourselves in constant negotiation and disagreement. Another obvious issue is scheduling conflicts. So Michael has a wife and 4 kids, really busy guy. And until recently, I was spending about 20 hours a week training as a professional kickboxer outside of my day job, right? And so we both also have like full-time jobs, which means it can be really difficult for us to find time to sit down and work together. So those are some of the disadvantages associated with preparing for the conference talk. But when it comes to the conference itself, there are some additional disadvantages. So one of the biggest ones is cost. Our companies have a small learning budget that we can put towards travel for conferences. And while some conferences will sponsor speakers, many of them are community run and can't afford to bring international speakers, or they can only afford to pay for one speaker. And since we live so far from America and Europe and the whole rest of the world, and we earn Australian dollars, it limits us on which kind of conferences we can attend. The final disadvantage that I'll speak about today is one that really irks me. When a man and a woman spend time together or work on a hobby project, the general assumption is they must be married. So I constantly have people at conferences asking me off to the side whether Michael is my husband or boyfriend. This one particularly irritates me because, number one, I'm nobody's wife. Number two, it's reflective of a larger societal problem that a man and a woman cannot possibly be friends. And number three, it implies that the only reason I would even be at a developers conference is because my husband is there. We do have a new marketing strategy though, and I think we're thinking of advertising sister brother duo Selena and Michael. So maybe that will help. But it's not all bad. There's also a huge number of advantages to pair presenting. This is the juicy bit. In fact, a lot of advantages are really similar to those of pair programming. So when coming up with your topic and writing your talk, you get a much faster feedback loop, just like pair programming. So you've got someone else who's also passionate about the project and can provide a different perspective in almost real time. And having that extra person helps you feel motivated and accountable and can actually result in finishing your presentation with less stress, believe it or not. And when it comes to the presentation itself, having somebody with you on the stage can be a real confidence boost, especially in the circumstances where the crowd is starting to fade. So I have an example, RailsConf 2019 in Minneapolis. Michael and I went over there to present a 2-hour workshop on multi-layer outside in BDD. And because of a schedule conflict and just having workshops and talks running at the same time, we got about an hour into our workshop. And then all of a sudden, half of the room just got up and left because obviously there was another exciting talk happening. And I just remember the feeling, and I was just completely disheartened. And I honestly don't know if I could have stood there and kept going if it wasn't for having somebody on the stage next to me that was also going through that experience, and us kind of helping, like pulling each other along. We've also received feedback about engagement from the audience. So it seems quite clear that by breaking up the talk with 2 different voices, a wider range of people feel engaged by the content and they find it easier to stay focused. And that's particularly relevant to long presentations. So earlier this year, we spoke at a conference with 1-hour time slots, and we heard from a number of people that even the most entertaining speakers just started to sound like they were droning on by the end of their presentations. So it was really refreshing for them to have, 2 voices to break up an hour. When attending a conference as a speaker, there's more that happens, though, than just giving your talk. There's also a huge opportunity to network with new and interesting people from all around the world. But, approaching people can be intimidating because you might feel self-conscious or overthink the way that they'll judge you or have social anxiety or, many other reasons. Personally, I find it very difficult to approach people who I've never met before. And I find it extremely difficult to just start conversations, even with people who I already know. So having a friend with me not only helps me to have more confidence walking into a room full of people who I don't know, but also to approach people without fear of rejection. So because if I kind of know in the back of my mind, if that was to happen, I would never end up sitting in the corner by myself because I always have a friend that I can talk to. And, added bonus, Michael's a big time social butterfly. So I happen to also get pulled into conversations that I might not have had the courage to walk into on my own or been even involved in the first place. Another big advantage that I've noticed is potentially an unfortunate one. There is safety in numbers. So we like to attend all the social events, many of which involve some drinking and some late nights and big crowds. And when we're in a different country, I can feel really safe getting to and from these events at night because I've brought a friend with me. And he's probably bigger than everyone in the street anyway. But Michael also at times acts as a cock block. I don't know if you know that term, cock block. Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's the unfortunate part, actually, is the fact that I even need one, right? I mentioned earlier that I think men are often intimidated by confident women, and that many people, and that many people make the assumption I'm a wife. Well, the reality is that usually by the time we get to the after party, barriers have been broken down, drinks have been had, and it's become common knowledge that Michael and I are just friends, right? So maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal, but in my mind, it's effing unprofessional to hit on conference attendees at a conference event, and I feel that it undermines my credibility, it invalidates the value of my presentation, and implies again that I'm maybe only useful there as a piece of eye candy. But I'm not going to dwell on the negative. It's just one of the kind of aspects. I've obviously, sorry, I've been talking a lot. I think I might be going over time. I've covered a lot of content in a really short amount of time, and I hope you've enjoyed some of the stories, but I also hope that I've helped raise a bit of awareness about what it means to give peer presentations. So I'm just going to recap on the key principles. First of all, if you're going to do it, there has to be a need for two speakers. Give both speakers a purpose. If you've got a one-person talk and you try and make two people do it, there's not really that much extra value to be had. Equity versus equality. Remember the difference. Equity takes into account people's disadvantages. So to be equal, the softer spoken person needs to speak more. To be equal, the shorter person needs to be closer to the audience or, elevated. To be equal, the less technical person needs to write the code or talk more about the technical topics. Do not be the magician's assistant. It's really just a bad look for all of us. Don't put your hand up and then rock up there and not know what's going on and stand beside someone who does a presentation. It's not going to look good for you. It's not going to look good for anyone. Although apparently some people in the audience might not notice because they'll think it's normal. Unconscious bias is real. This is only going to change slowly and over time. So we really just have to persevere. Guy-girl combo for the win, because it normalizes portraying men and women as equals. And this is what we really want to see. And conferences love live code, live demos. It's not really specific to peer presenting. It's just a fact that people love to see live code and live demos. And if we could see more women doing them at conferences, it would help to normalize seeing women as super technical, the way that we see various other people who do live code and live demos. So if you're going to do a talk, try to do a live code or live demos. Michael and I believe in trying things, failing fast and learning often. So we are failure driven. You can find our past talks at failure-driven.com or on YouTube. And next up for us, I'm going to be heading off to Copenhagen Developer Festival, where I'll be presenting for the first time a new talk, Developer Smackdown, a talk that debates various tools and design choices when building software. And in October, you can catch us at RubyConf Thailand for Ruby versus Kickboxer version 2, if you've seen the first one. And thanks so much again for listening. Please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about peer presenting, if you've seen any good ones or bad ones. and any of the things that I've talked about or anything else.